This is Jimmy Bach, and this is History with Jimmy, along with my producer, Chandler Holmes. Today, we are going to be talking about the Native American Indian, and they were right here in Shickshinny. In fact, this whole area, there are many places in the area that has taken Indian names. So we're going to start out. This is a map that we have, and if you come to the FLT Museum, you'll be able to see the different Indians that were here and their tribes and so on. Here's Pennsylvania, and it shows some of the different tribes that were here. Also, the names of some of the chiefs and stuff. So this is a very interesting episode, which is episode 14. Early life in and around Shickshinny has been well proven that Indians once lived here. They roamed the hills and valleys. Arrowheads could be found nearly everywhere, and they can still be found today. Commonplace for Indian artifact lovers in Shickshinny to walk up the canal path, which is now the Susquehanna Warriors Trail, to Retreat Farms, which lay northeast of the town, and you could find different Indian artifacts. From this, it was quite evident that a large tribe of Indians once lived here in a large group. In Shickshinny, there are a number of residents who have wonderful collections of Indian artifacts. We would hope that some of them would be able to donate some of those artifacts to us, so we would have some more things for people to see when they come to the FLT Museum. Many of the Indian relics were found around this neighborhood, went to collectors, and many people just stopped here and looked for Indian artifacts because there were so many of them, apparently. The meal bowls were mostly left into rock ledges. And believe it or not, a resident of Parker Hill, which is right up there, during the construction of a pool, uncovered a rock ledge. And in the rock ledge, there were 3 kneeling bowls worked into this rock ledge. This was mostly done by squaws because the men were out doing the hunting and fishing. A meal bowl is a cup-shaped hole worked into a larger piece of rock. And the purpose of this was to pounce nuts, corn, meats to make pemmican. Pemmican was the most common food for Eastern Indians. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. If the only writers would have known, there could have been volumes written about the Indians, their way of life, their hunting and fishing skills, making arrowheads, birch bark canoes, and many other works by the Indians that have been forgotten in time. When earlier the white settlers arrived in this new land, there were many obstacles to come. And at times, it would be very difficult to get the necessities of life from the woods. Also, wild beasts, cold winters, held no mercy for early settlers. So the Indians taught the settlers how to build log cabins. They also taught the settlers how to get sugar from maple trees, how to grow corn using fish as fertilizer. The Indians that taught the settlers how to plant corn were known as corn planters. And the European and Asiatic people never knew how important corn, potatoes, and tomatoes were as food. In America, the Native Americans relied heavily on corn as part of their livelihood, and the Indians passed this knowledge on to the settlers. They did this because they believed in the Great Spirit. They put all things here for everyone. The Great Spirit also shared with friends or strangers and asked for nothing in return. So the Indians willingly taught the early settlers how to grow, keep, grind, and cook corn. They also taught the settlers how to make cornbread, cake, pemmican, hominy, and succotash. The Indians that inhabited this region before the white man began to arrive spoke the Algonquins language. And again, I may not be pronouncing this 100% correct. The most important tribes were those who were Lenapes, also known as the Delaware. Those tribes of Indians were peaceful Indians and seldom caused any trouble. It has been said about the peaceful tribes that they never pulled one's scalps since the beginning of time. They also point to the fact they did not take part in the Wyoming Massacre, which we will be doing an episode about that in the future. Not all white settlers treated the Indians kindly, especially the fur traders. They would give the Indians rum for free, and once the Indian was in a drunken stupor, they would make deals for fur. They would also cheat him in these deals. The settlers would cheat in land deals, and in the South there were 16,000 Cherokees driven from their homes by armed escort to Oklahoma. 4,000 of those Indians died along the way. The trail that they were escorted was known as the Trail of Tears. In Pennsylvania, there was a law at one point paying any citizen $250 to bring in the scalp of an Indian. In different localities, they used different methods to get the land away from the Indians. Here in this valley, the Dutch used a more peaceful method, however, not the most honorable. It caused the least bloodshed. The Dutch held a meeting with the Indians and proposed each side, the white settlers and the Indians, would choose 10 men to sit in council until one side or the other would give the land to the other. This being white settlers to give land to the Indians, or the Indians to give land to the settlers. The Indians used the forest for hunting ground, but the white settlers cut the forest down to grow grain. From this, trouble arose between the two groups of people. To this, the Dutch gave a proposal to the Indians that the Indians agreed to accept. Then both sides chose a cliff of rocks that overlooked Wolf Walden, which was at the time known as Pulpit Rock. And after the meeting, it was named Council Cup or Council Head. The Indians relied on their endurance being acclimated to outdoor living and only brought rum and tobacco. The Dutch, however, brought wheelbarrows filled with rye bread, sausage, and sauerkraut. The Dutch also brought extra clothing in case of inclement weather. Once, an evening came that they built a fire and sat around it. And while sitting around the fire, no one talked. The Dutch ate while the Indians just smoked. This went on for 3 days. And at noon on the third day, the Indians said, "If that is all that this land will produce, we would rather have the names of the place than the land." So now we know why a lot of these places around here have Indian names, such as Shickshinny. And to this proposition, the Dutch readily agreed. Why not? Because they were getting land. Therefore, some of the names of the Indians gave different places in the valley remains of how the Indians named them. Shickshinny, according to this document, says surrounded by 5 mountains. Those mountains being Newport, Lee, Rocky, Knob, and Lookout. The Indians, in time of danger, would put up smoke signals calling for aid or help. In later years, the Congress finally passed laws forbidding the taking of Indians' land without paying for it, even if the pay is forever small. All Indians did not agree with the Council Cup settlement of the land, and trouble between white settlers and Indians continued for years. The writer of this article had a great-great-uncle killed by an Indian. He was shot in the back by a poisoned arrowhead while eating grapes at a grape arbor and died from the effects of it. The Indians made poison for the tips of their arrows by taking a deer liver and having a rattlesnake bite it many times. Once the liver was saturated with venom from the snake or snakes, it was made into a paste and put on the arrowhead. The arrow was constructed so when the shaft was pulled out of the body, the arrowhead still remained in the body. Thus, making it many times more fatal to the person that got shot. Not all settlers came to America for personal gain and wealth. The Society of Friends, a sect of German evangelists named Moravians, left good home just to teach Christianity to the Indians. And a few of those settlers were Conrad Weiser, a great interpreter and guide, Reverend David Zeisenberger, Reverend John Heckwelder. Just to name a few, who came to America and lived among many tribes of Indians, and at times they became great friends. Chief Shickshinny and Conrad Weiser became great friends, and at times Chief Shickshinny gave decisions against his own tribe to favor Conrad. Conrad was he was thought of very well by the Indians. And he had a very splendid rifle that Chief Shickshinny greatly admired and would like to own. But Indians had a way of going around or asking about things without actually asking. So to talk outright for the rifle was not a good Indian behavior. But if the Indian had a dream, his friends were supposed to help fulfill this dream. One day, when Shickshinny met Conrad, he said, "Brother Conrad, I have a dream, and in this dream you gave me your rifle." Conrad immediately handed over the rifle and said, "Chief Shickshinny, I also had a dream that you were so overjoyed with the rifle that you gave me that island in the river." With the grunt, Shickshinny gave up the island but said, "Brother Conrad, let us never dream again." Some settlers were good and kind to the Indians, while the English fur traders would beat cheap dealings out of their furs and leather goods. This made the Indians say, "White men speak with forked tongue," so we know where that came from. And as long as William Penn lived, his promises to the Indians were kept. However, after his death, most other prominent and promises to the Indians by the white men were violated. England's promise to the Indians that if they would fight on their side, that the Indians would get all their land back. This promise caused a lot of bloodshed between the settlers and the Indians. The way the Indians were treated here in America and the shameful exploitation of their land and goods was a disgrace to the white settlers. So you heard me previously talk about this Trail of Tears. So for history, I got this off the internet, and in 1830s, the United States government forcibly removed southern, western Native Americans from their homelands and relocated them on lands in Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma. Now, just imagine this. These Indians were here before us. They helped settlers. They helped them learn how to survive and everything else, and this is what we did to them. It's not right. You wouldn't like it if somebody came to your place and forcefully removed you, even though it was yours. This tragic event is referred to as the Trail of Tears. Over 10,000 Native Americans died during removal or soon upon arrival in Indian Territory. Since its inception, the United States government struggled with the problem. Greedy citizens and politicians in the Southeast were bent on requiring the valuable lands occupied by the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, and Muscogee Seminoles and other Native American nations. And after the Louisiana Purchase, an enormous acquisition of territory went into west of the Mississippi in 1803. President Jefferson presumed that the Native Americans could be persuaded to give up their homes in exchange for land further west. Well, he was wrong. Following Jefferson's lead, President Andrew Jackson pushed for the passage of the Indian Removal Act of 1830. This act provided funds for the United States government to negotiate removable treaties with the tribes. The federal government coerced tribal leaders to sign these treaties, and factions arose within the tribes as many opposed giving up their land. And why wouldn't they? Cherokee Principal Chief John Ross, he even traveled to Washington to try to negotiate alternatives to removal and pleaded for the government to readdress the injustices of this treaties. The United States government listened, but did not deviate from its policy. And although President Jackson negotiated the removable treaties, and at some point people thought that he was actually responsible for removing the Indians, and that's not quite true. He did sign the treaty, but President Martin Van Buren enforced them, and the impact of the removal was felt by the Chickasaw. Starting in 1831, they were forced off their lands in Mississippi. The years 1836 to 1838 saw the Greeks and all the different tribes forced from their homes and removed to Indian territory. Some United States citizens disagreed with the action, and one of them was Congressman David Crockett, known as Davy Crockett, and he sided with the Native Americans. Christian missionaries also opposed the Indian Removal Act. They denounced the injustice of this policy, and will not the people in whose power it is to readdress Indian wrongs awake to their duty? Will they not think of the multitudes, swept into the eternity of the cupidity of the white man who is in the enjoyment of wealth and freedom on the original soil of these oppressed Indians? Lucy Butler wrote this to her friend, Jerusalem Burnlap, in 1839. Her husband was the noted missionary L. Butler, and he accompanied the Cherokee and served as their doctor, and an estimated 4,000, a fifth of the Cherokee population, died along the trail. As I had said previously, the Indians were not treated fairly. They were here first. It's still going on today in different parts where they try to take land or do something to their land without their permission. But there's something else that I want to point out here today, what happened to Indians, and it came right here in Pennsylvania. The Carlisle Industrial School was started in 1879, and it was open for 30 years with a mission. To kill the Indian, to save the man. They forced, now listen to this, they forced students to speak English, wear Anglo-American clothing, and act accordingly to U.S. values and cultures. They were punished for speaking their native language or practicing their ancient customs. Their names were replaced with Christian ones. More than 150 children lie in Carlisle Barracks Post-Cemetery, students at the Indian Industrial School. It closed in 1918. Many of them died from tuberculosis. They never returned home. For more information, go to the Carlisle Indian School online and find out the full story of what happened to them. This is Jimmy Bach signing off on episode 14 with my producer Chandler Holmes. We thank you for listening. Please subscribe to this channel and pass it on to someone else, as we're passing on history to those that may not know about it. Thank you again for watching.